This isn't an earthquake. It isn't a flood. It's something worse. Slower, a geological monster waking from a 1,000-year sleep. Right now, in one of America's wealthiest coastal communities, the ground is moving. Not inches per year, inches per week. In some places, inches per day. Over 600 homes sit on a 600-acre piece of land that is actively, unstoppably sliding toward the Pacific Ocean. Their foundations are cracking apart. Their gas lines have been severed. Their power has been cut. This isn't a natural disaster. It's a slow-motion execution. What would you do if your home, your life's investment, was moving an inch while you slept? Let us know in the comments below. So, the city did something desperate. They drilled into the earth itself, not to build something, but to drain it. A last-ditch effort to slow the slide before it consumed everything. This is a story that unfolds in real time. A shocking number of you who watch these deep dive reports forget to subscribe. If you believe this kind of journalism is vital, take 1 second and hit that button. It's the only way we can continue bringing you these stories. Okay, let's begin. This catastrophe was not an accident of nature. It was an inevitability built into the bedrock itself. The Palos Verdes Peninsula is a geological anomaly, land pushed up from the ocean floor over millennia, creating breathtaking cliffs and billion-dollar views. But beneath the facade of coastal paradise lies a fatal flaw. Deep, tilted layers of Monterey shale, interspersed with slick, greasy seams of an ancient volcanic clay called bentonite. When it's dry, bentonite is as hard as rock, stable, trustworthy. But when it gets wet, it transforms. It becomes a frictionless lubricant, a geological grease spread hundreds of feet beneath the surface. The land on top, and everything built upon it, is no longer sitting on solid ground. It's sitting on a slip plane, waiting for a push. That push came in 1956. Los Angeles County, in its post-war rush to expand, decided to extend Crenshaw Boulevard. To do it, they dumped roughly 1 million tons of dirt and rock at the head of the Portuguese Bend Canyon system. The weight was too much. The fragile equilibrium that held the peninsula together for centuries was broken. The bentonite clay, already waiting, became a slide. For nearly 70 years, it was a manageable problem. Annoying, but not deadly. The land moved, but it moved slowly. An inch a month, maybe a foot over the course of an entire year. People built their lives around it. Engineers developed workarounds. The slide was a known quirk of the area, a geological personality trait. Residents patched their drywall, shimmed their doors, and got on with their lives. It was a monster, but it was a sleeping monster. Then came the rain. The atmospheric rivers of 2023 and 2024 were not normal storms. They were historic deluges that poured trillions of gallons of water onto a Southern California landscape unprepared for that kind of assault. For Rancho Palos Verdes, this was a death sentence. The water didn't just run off into the ocean. It soaked deep into the earth, penetrating hundreds of feet down, far below the original slide. It found a second, deeper slip plane, a layer of bentonite between 135 and 300 feet underground that had been dry for centuries, and it woke the monster up. The movement went from 1 foot per year to 8 inches per week, then 12 inches per week. In the worst hit pockets of the Portuguese Bend neighborhood, the land began moving at a rate of 50 feet per year. Think about that. Your entire backyard, gone, your driveway, shifted a full car length to the south in 12 months. This was a new kind of disaster. Not the sudden violence of an earthquake, but the slow, grinding, psychological torture of watching your world pull itself apart, inch by excruciating inch. Kyle Torge, the executive vice president of the engineering firm Alpha Structural, was one of the first to see the unfixable reality. His teams were on the ground, assessing foundations that were literally being stretched past their breaking point. It has unraveled into a disastrous situation, he said. For many of these homes, he knew that ship has sailed. There was no reinforcing a home that was being torn in two by the planet itself. The first systems to fail were the ones that keep modern life possible. Underground, the Earth's movement was shearing metal gas mains like they were made of clay. On the surface, utility poles were being pulled taut, the power lines humming with tension, threatening to snap and spark a wildfire in a community surrounded by dry brush. In the summer of 2024, SoCal Gas and Southern California Edison made a brutal calculation. They cut the utilities. Over 340 homes went dark, not because they had been destroyed, but because they were about to become death traps. Suddenly, a pocket of one of America's most affluent zip codes was thrown into a pre-industrial existence. Multi-million-dollar homes with panoramic ocean views were now running on noisy gas generators and giant, unsightly propane tanks trucked in and installed on what was left of their lawns. Life became a series of logistical calculations. Is there enough fuel for the generator to run the refrigerator overnight? How much propane is left for hot water? The dream of California coastal living had become an off-grid nightmare. Imagine owning a $4 million house where you have to use flashlights to navigate your own hallway. It's a bizarre, almost unbelievable reality. If your community has ever faced an impossible, surreal challenge like this, we want to hear about it in the comments. The stories of resilience are often as important as the disaster itself. For the residents of neighborhoods like Portuguese Bend, Seaview, and Rolling Hills, every day brought a fresh wave of degradation. They would wake up to new cracks sprawling across their kitchen tiles. A bedroom door that closed perfectly the night before would no longer fit in its frame. The gaps in their floors widened. The sound of their homes groaning and shifting became the new, terrifying background noise of their lives. This wasn't a home. It was a patient in intensive care. And the prognosis was terminal. The city of Rancho Palos Verdes was now facing an existential threat. This wasn't just a few houses. This was an entire district, a tax base, a community being erased in slow motion. The city manager, Ara Miranian, found himself coordinating a multi-agency response to a crisis that had no precedent. This wasn't a fire you could put out or a flood that would recede. This was geology in action. How do you fight a moving tectonic plate? On September 3rd, 2024, the situation had become so dire that Governor Gavin Newsom declared a formal state of emergency, unlocking state resources. But everyone knew that was just a band-aid. The problem was 300 feet underground. The most visible casualty wasn't a home. It was a masterpiece. The Wayfarers' Chapel, known to the world as the Glass Church, had stood on the bluffs of Rancho Palos Verdes since 1951. Designed by Lloyd Wright, the son of the legendary Frank Lloyd Wright, it was a marvel of modernist architecture, a delicate structure of glass, steel, and redwood that seemed to dissolve into the surrounding trees and sky. It was a National Historic Landmark, a place where generations had gotten married, found solace, and looked out at the Pacific. Nature, however, does not care about architectural history. The land beneath the chapel was moving. Cracks appeared in its concrete floor. Panes of glass, stressed beyond their limits, began to shatter. The beautiful structure was being warped, twisted apart by the same inexorable forces tearing at the homes nearby. On May 13, 2024, the board of the chapel made a heartbreaking announcement. They were closing it indefinitely. But they were going to do something more. They weren't just going to let it be destroyed. They were going to save it by taking it apart. The decision was made to methodically dismantle the entire chapel, piece by painstaking piece. Every pane of glass, every redwood beam, every steel frame was carefully numbered, cataloged, and placed into storage. It was an act of profound hope and profound loss. The deconstruction was an admission that this specific piece of earth was no longer safe, that the view that had made the chapel iconic was now the very thing destroying it. The plan, as it firmed up through 2026, was to rebuild it like a giant sacred Lego set on stable ground. A new prospective site was identified: Battery Barns, a former coastal defense installation from World War II, safely inland, near City Hall. The Glass Church would live again. But its relationship with the sea, the very thing that gave it its soul, would be severed forever. A landmark saved, but its magic fundamentally altered. The dismantling of the chapel became a potent symbol for the entire crisis. You can't fight the slide. You can only retreat. The scale of this governmental and financial whiplash is staggering. If you agree, Hitting that like button tells the algorithm that this is a story that needs to be seen. And if you know someone who thinks this is just a local issue, sharing this video with them is the most powerful way to show them the real systemic failures at play. For the homeowners without the resources to dismantle and move their entire lives, the only option was to fight. But the enemy was the ground beneath their feet. The city, under then Mayor John Cruikshank, a civil engineer himself, knew they couldn't stop the slide. But maybe they could slow it down. The science was straightforward. The bentonite was deadly because it was saturated with water. The solution, at least in theory, was to get the water out. So, the city embarked on an audacious engineering gamble. They began installing a series of deep, vertical dewatering wells at the toe of the landslide. 6 of them drilled deep into the earth. The idea was to pump the groundwater out faster than the rains could feed it in, to effectively dry out the slip plain from below. It was a desperate, expensive intervention. By late 2024, those wells were running around the clock, pulling out approximately 600 gallons of water every single minute. 600 gallons a minute, 864,000 gallons a day, over 25 million gallons a month. Water being pumped out from under a neighborhood just to keep it from sliding into the sea. And it worked. Sort of. The movement, which had been peaking at a terrifying 8 to 12 inches per week, began to decelerate. It didn't stop, but it slowed down. The patient was still dying, but more slowly. The wells were buying time. The question was, what was that time for? The long-term solution was projected to cost $150 million, a massive, complex project to permanently stabilize the entire 600-acre slide complex. The city of Rancho Palos Verdes did not have $150 million, but for a moment, it seemed like help was on the way. In August of 2023, the city had successfully secured a $23 million grant from FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, the BRIC program. It was a huge victory, the seed money they desperately needed to begin the long-term fix. Finally, a glimmer of hope. Then, in April 2025, Washington, D.C. pulled the plug. The federal government didn't just reject Rancho Palos Verdes' grant. It canceled the entire nationwide $5 billion BRIC program, citing waste and abuse across the country. Just like that, the city's $23 million lifeline vanished. They weren't singled out. They were collateral damage of a national policy shift. As former Mayor David Bradley, who served in 2025 and lobbied Washington relentlessly after the cancellation, explained, the situation was devastating. The issue is that this is taking the money that we would be using for long-term solutions off the table again, he said. It put the city in a position where the only thing it could do was focus on immediate, near-term emergency tasks. They could react, but they could never get ahead of the problem. The federal aid that eventually trickled in was almost insulting. In May 2026, Congress allocated a minor $2.3 million grant. $2.3 million. To solve a $150 million problem. It was less than a drop in the bucket. It was a rounding error. For the hundreds of homeowners living in this state of perpetual anxiety, the government's response felt like a profound betrayal. They were trapped. Their homes were unsellable, cracking apart day by day. Their utilities were gone. And the federal promise of a rescue had evaporated into thin air. The next offered solution was a buyout. In October 2024, FEMA announced a $42 million voluntary property buyout program. For those whose homes were clearly lost, it was a way out, a chance to recoup some of their loss and start over. But like everything else in this crisis, the promise was not the reality. The program became a bureaucratic black hole. By February of 2026, an agonizing year and a half after the announcement, CalOS, the state's emergency services office, informed the city that only $10.16 million had been cleared, enough to buy out just 5 homes. 5 out of hundreds that were affected. The city immediately applied for another $19 million, but the process was a quagmire of paperwork and approvals. Homeowners were stuck in limbo, waiting for a government check that might never come, while their single greatest asset disintegrated around them. This isn't a story with a clear hero or villain. It's a story about inertia, the inertia of the Earth, slow and unstoppable, and the inertia of bureaucracy, equally slow and equally unforgiving. I know we've already asked, but the support from subscribers is what fuels these deep investigations. If you've found value in this reporting, please take a moment to subscribe. It makes a bigger difference than you can imagine. The physical effects of the landslide are rewriting the map of the California coast in ways that are hard to comprehend. The landscape itself is being torn apart. By April 2026, reports surfaces that 16 miles of beloved coastal trails, paths used by hikers and bikers for decades, had been forever altered. What were once gentle trails were now impassable. The ground had opened up, creating chasms 20 feet deep and up to 12 feet wide. The earth had literally ripped itself open. But the most surreal transformation was happening at the water's edge. The unimaginable weight of the 600-acre landmass, all that dirt and rock and home debris, was pushing relentlessly toward the ocean. This immense pressure, a geological piston, was compressing the toe of the landslide so forcefully that the ocean floor itself began to buckle and rise. At the Portuguese Bend Beach Club, a new beach was born. The seafloor was pushed upward by 6 vertical feet, creating a swath of brand new coastline where there was once only water. It's a geological phenomenon that speaks to the sheer power at play. The landslide is so massive, so powerful, it is literally terraforming the planet, moving the ocean floor, and building new land. This new beach is not a gift. It is a warning. It is a physical manifestation of the millions of tons of earth on the move, a testament to a force that human engineering can only hope to inconvenience, not defeat. As of the summer of 2026, the crisis is in a state of managed suspension. It is not over. The local state of emergency, first declared in 2023, remains active. On June 16, 2026, the City Council, now under Mayor Paul Sio, met to review the latest grim updates. Public safety and the landslide response remain the city's absolute top priorities because they have no other choice. There are small signs of adaptation. In areas where the land movement has slowed to a more manageable crawl. Southern California Edison has begun a 5-month project they call Attention Relief Strategy. They are installing new, flexible electrical infrastructure in the Rolling Hills area, designed to stretch and move with the ground without snapping. It's a clever piece of engineering. It's also an admission of defeat. They are no longer trying to stop the ground from moving. They are just trying to build things that can break more slowly. The dewatering wells are still pumping 600 gallons a minute, a constant, energy-intensive effort to hold back the tide. But everyone knows what happens if the pumps stop, or if another series of atmospheric rivers arrives, overwhelming the pump's capacity. The winter of 2026 gave them a terrifying preview. Heavy storms during the holidays triggered another acceleration, bumping movement back up to 2 inches per week in some areas. A chilling reminder that the stability they have is fragile and temporary. The core of the problem remains. The bentonite is still there. The deep slip plain is still saturated. The entire 600-acre landmass is still gravitationally unstable. The community of Rancho Palos Verdes is living on a knife's edge, caught between the unstoppable physics of their own land and the agonizingly slow pace of the bureaucracy that was supposed to save them. The former mayor John Cruikshank, speaking in 2025, put the new reality in stark terms. The land at its worst was moving about 50 feet per year, and now it's currently about 20 feet per year in the worst areas. Slower, but still moving, still destroying, still sliding toward the sea. The third and final ask, I promise, but our mission is to tell these critical stories that are often forgotten. Subscribing is free, and it is the single most important way to ensure we can continue this work. Thank you. The story of Rancho Palos Verdes is not a cautionary tale about building on a cliff. It's a story about a changing planet and our hubris in the face of it. For decades, the slow creep was manageable. It was a known risk, factored into the price of paradise. But the climate changed the math. The historic rains turned a chronic condition into an acute crisis. What happened here is a microcosm of a larger problem. Infrastructure built for a 20th century climate is now facing 21st century forces it was never designed to withstand. The residents of Portuguese Bend didn't do anything wrong. They bought homes in an established, affluent community. They paid their taxes. They trusted the ground beneath their feet. But the ground betrayed them. Now they are refugees in their own homes, watching their life's work and equity get erased by a disaster that unfolds not in a violent rush, but in the silent, soul-crushing expanse of time. The question is not if the land will move again. It will. The question is what happens when the next deluge comes, when the pumps can't keep up, when the temporary fixes are overwhelmed. The real story of Rancho Palos Verdes is not just in the homes that are cracking apart, it's in the systems that failed them. The flawed historical decisions, the unpredictable climate, the bureaucratic paralysis. The new beach at the base of the cliff stands as a strange, quiet monument, a testament to the immense, indifferent power of the earth. A piece of the world that human beings thought they owned, being unceremoniously